The last thing Delilah Preston expected when she knelt in the dusty stable yard that scorching afternoon in June 1878 was for her entire life to change. But then again, survival rarely left room for expectations. She worked the worn cloth across the pommel of a rancher's saddle, her fingers raw and blistered from 3 days of scrubbing leather until it gleamed, earning just enough pennies to buy stale bread and maybe, if she was lucky, a handful of dried beans. The sun beat down mercilessly on Stockton, California, turning the air thick and shimmering, and sweat traced paths through the dust on her face as she bent over her work, determined to finish before the light failed. "You have got quite the touch with that leather," a voice said from somewhere above her, deep and rough like gravel underfoot. Delilah looked up, squinting against the brightness, and found herself staring at a pair of scuffed boots that had seen better days, attached to long legs clad in dusty denim. Her gaze traveled upward past a gun belt worn low on narrow hips, past a faded blue shirt stretched across broad shoulders, finally landing on a face that made her breath catch despite herself. The man stood tall and lean, with dark hair curling slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer, green and clear and entirely too knowing. "Thank you, sir," she said carefully, setting the cloth down and wiping her hands on her already filthy skirt. "Are you here to collect your tack?" "Not mine," he said, gesturing to the row of saddles waiting for attention. "Belongs to Ben Carver, but he is inside the saloon getting himself liquored up, so I figured I would check on his investment." He crouched down beside her with easy grace, studying the saddle she had been working on with an appraising eye. "How much does old Thomas pay you for this?" "2 cents per saddle," Delilah admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. "3 if it is particularly worn." The man's jaw tightened, something dangerous flickering behind those green eyes. 2 cents for work that would cost a man 50. That is criminal." "That is survival," Delilah corrected, reaching for the cloth again. "And I cannot afford to lose even this pittance by complaining. If you will excuse me, I need to finish before dark." He was quiet for a long moment, watching her work with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and thoughtful. "What if I offered you different work, better paying work?" Delilah's hands stilled on the leather. She had heard such offers before, always from men who thought a woman alone was fair game for their appetites. "I am not interested in that kind of employment," she said flatly, keeping her eyes on the saddle. "Whoa now," he said quickly, holding up both hands. "I am not propositioning you, miss. I am talking about legitimate work. My ranch is 30 miles east of here, right where the valley meets the foothills. I have been looking for someone to help maintain my tack, care for my horses, maybe help with the house since my mother passed last winter. You would have your own room, 3 meals a day and proper wages. $10 a month plus room and board." Now Delilah did look at him, searching his face for signs of deception or ulterior motives. $10 a month was more money than she had seen in 6 months combined, more than enough to eventually save for passage east where she might find her sister. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" "Because I recognize quality work when I see it," he replied simply. "And because I know desperation when I see it too. My name is Jackson Montgomery, and I give you my word as a rancher and a gentleman that my offer is honest. You would be safe at my place, and you would be treated with respect." Delilah studied him carefully, weighing her options. She could stay here in Stockton, slowly starving while polishing saddles for Pennies, dodging the unwanted attention of men who saw her poverty as opportunity. Or she could take a chance on this stranger with the kind eyes and the promise of something better. "My name is Delilah Preston," she said finally. "And if you are lying to me, I want you to know that I have a knife and I am not afraid to use it." Jackson's mouth curved into a genuine smile, the first she had seen from him. "Fair enough, Miss Preston. I would not expect anything less from a woman with the gumption to survive out here alone. When can you be ready to leave?" "I own what I am wearing and nothing else," Delilah said, gesturing to her patched dress and worn boots. "I suppose that means I am ready whenever you are." He stood, offering her his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip strong but gentle. "Then let us settle your account with Thomas and get supplies for the journey. We will leave at first light tomorrow. That will give you time to say goodbye if you need to." Delilah almost laughed at that. There was no one in Stockton who would miss her, no one who would notice her absence except perhaps Thomas, and only because he would need to find another desperate soul to exploit. "There is no one to say goodbye to," she admitted. "But I would appreciate the chance to wash and maybe get a decent meal before we travel." Jackson's expression softened with something that looked like sympathy but felt less pitying, more understanding. "Come on then. The boarding house serves a good supper, and I will spring for a hot bath and a room for you tonight. Consider it an advance on your wages." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the heat already building even before the sun fully crested the horizon. Delilah waited outside the boarding house with her stomach full for the first time in weeks and her skin clean, wearing the same dress, but feeling somehow renewed. Jackson appeared leading 2 horses, a tall bay gelding for himself, and a smaller chestnut mare with gentle eyes. "This is Rosie," he said, handing her the mare's reins. "She is patient and steady, perfect for the journey. Can you ride?" "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," Delilah said, running her hand along Rosie's neck. "I have been riding since I could walk." "Good." Jackson swung up onto his bay with practiced ease. "The road is decent for the first 20 miles, but then we cut through some rougher country. We should reach the ranch by sunset if we keep a good pace." They rode out of Stockton as the town was waking, past the false-fronted buildings and the bustling rail yard that had first brought Delilah here 2 years ago, chasing rumors of work and opportunity. She did not look back. Whatever lay ahead at Jackson Montgomery's ranch had to be better than what she was leaving behind. For the first few hours they rode in companionable silence, the landscape rolling past in shades of gold and green. The Sacramento River Valley stretched wide and fertile around them, fields of wheat rippling in the breeze and orchards heavy with early fruit. Gradually the land began to rise, the foothills emerging from the flatness like waves frozen in earth and stone. "Tell me about your ranch," Delilah said finally, breaking the silence. "What kind of operation do you run?" "Cattle mostly," Jackson replied, shifting in his saddle. "About 200 head right now, though I am hoping to expand. I also breed horses, nothing fancy but good solid working stock. My father started the place 30 years ago when California was still figuring out what it wanted to be. He died 5 years back, left everything to me and my mother. Then she followed him last December, and I have been trying to keep things running on my own ever since." "No siblings?" Delilah asked. "Had a brother," Jackson said quietly. "He died at Shiloh in '62. I was supposed to go with him, but my father needed me here to keep the ranch going. Jacob always said I got the better end of that deal." The pain in his voice was old but still sharp, a wound that had scarred but never fully healed. "I am sorry," Delilah said and meant it. "War takes too much from too many. It does indeed." Jackson glanced over at her, his expression curious. "What about you? How does a farm girl from Missouri end up polishing saddles in Stockton?" Delilah hesitated, unsure how much to share. but something about the way he had been honest with her made her want to reciprocate. "My parents died of cholera when I was 16, she began. "Left me and my younger sister Deanna with nothing but debts. The bank took the farm, and we ended up with distant cousins who saw us as free labor. When I turned 18, I decided we should head west, make our own way. We made it as far as Kansas City before our money ran out. Deanna got work in a dress shop, and I took whatever jobs I could find. We saved for 2 years, finally bought passage on a wagon train headed for California. Let me guess," Jackson said gently. "Something went wrong. Everything went wrong." Delilah's throat tightened with the memory. "We were 3 weeks into the journey when Deanna took sick. Fever and chills, getting worse every day. The wagon master would not wait, said we had to keep moving or get left behind. By the time we reached Fort Laramie, she was so weak she could barely stand. I used every penny we had for medicine and a room where she could recover. It took 2 months before she was strong enough to travel again, but by then our money was gone. The wagon train had moved on without us. So you came to California alone," Jackson said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Not entirely alone," Delilah corrected. "Deanna was still too weak for the journey, so she stayed in Laramie with a church family who needed help with their children. The plan was for me to get to California, find work, and send money back so she could join me. But work has been harder to find than I expected, and what I could find barely kept me fed, much less able to save. I have been in Stockton for 8 months now, and I have not been able to send Deanna a single dollar." Jackson was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "Does she know you are safe? I write when I can afford the postage," Delilah said. "But I am ashamed to tell her the truth of my circumstances. In my last letter, I told her I was working at a respectable establishment and saving money. I could not bear for her to know I was polishing saddles in a stable yard for Pennies." "There is no shame in honest work," Jackson said firmly. "No matter how little it pays. You did what you had to do to survive, and that takes more courage than most people will ever need." He paused, then added, "If you prove as good at the ranch work as I think you will be, maybe we can work out a way to bring your sister west. I could always use another hand, and if she is anything like you, I expect she would earn her keep." Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes, the first real hope she had felt in months blooming warm in her chest. "You do not even know if I can do the work yet," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know quality when I see it," Jackson repeated, echoing his words from the day before. "In workmanship and in people. I have a feeling about you, Miss Preston. I think you are going to surprise yourself with what you are capable of." They rode on as the sun climbed higher, stopping briefly at a creek to water the horses and eat the provisions Jackson had packed. The landscape grew more rugged as they climbed into the foothills, the valley spreading out behind them like a patchwork quilt of greens and golds. Oak trees dotted the hillsides, their branches providing welcome shade from the relentless heat. "Not much further now," Jackson said as they mounted up again. "Another hour and we will be home." Home. The word resonated in Delilah's chest, foreign and familiar all at once. She had not had a real home since her parents died, only temporary shelters and uncomfortable corners. The idea that she might be riding toward something permanent, something stable, felt almost too good to be true. The ranch appeared gradually as they crested a rise, nestled in a small valley between rolling hills. A sturdy 2-story house stood at the center, built from local stone with a wide porch wrapped around the front. A large barn sat nearby, its red paint faded but solid, surrounded by various outbuildings and corrals. Beyond the immediate structures, Delilah could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures and horses moving lazily in a large paddock. "Welcome to the Montgomery Ranch," Jackson said, pride evident in his voice. "It is not fancy, but it is solid and it is mine. Well, ours now, I suppose, if you are willing to stay." Delilah took in the sight of the ranch, her heart swelling with a feeling she could not quite name. It looked like the kind of place where a person could build a life, where hard work would be rewarded, and safety was more than a distant hope. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "More than I could have imagined." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As they approached the barn, a weathered man in his 60s emerged, his face breaking into a wide grin when he saw Jackson. "About damn time you got back," the older man called out. "Was starting to think you decided to stay in town and leave me to manage this whole operation myself." "As if I would trust you with that responsibility, old man," Jackson replied with obvious affection. "Delilah Preston, this contrary cuss is Walter Hayes, my foreman and general pain in my backside. Walter, Miss Preston is going to be helping around the ranch, managing the tack and horses, helping with the house." Walter's keen blue eyes assessed Delilah with the practiced gaze of someone who had spent a lifetime judging horseflesh and character. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded approvingly. "Welcome to the Montgomery place, miss. Always good to have capable hands around, and Lord knows Jackson here could use the help. Boy works himself to the bone trying to do everything alone." "I am looking forward to making myself useful," Delilah said, dismounting with only slight stiffness from the long ride, "and grateful for the opportunity." "Let us get you settled," Jackson said, swinging down from his bay. "Walter, can you see to the horses? I will show Miss Preston to her room and get her oriented." The house was cool and welcoming inside, with thick stone walls that kept out the worst of the heat. The main floor held a large kitchen with a cast iron stove, a comfortable sitting room with worn furniture that looked well-loved rather than shabby, and a dining room with a solid oak table. Upstairs, Jackson led her down a hallway to a room at the far end. "This was my mother's sewing room," he explained, pushing open the door. "But I moved all her things to storage last month. Thought it might make a good bedroom for when I found help. It has a good window for cross breeze and a view of the eastern hills." The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a sturdy dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a wooden chair by the window. To Delilah, who had been sleeping on a thin pallet in a boarding house room shared with 3 other women, it looked like luxury. "It is perfect," she said, setting down the small bundle of supplies Jackson had bought her in town. "More than perfect, actually. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery." "Jackson," he corrected gently. "We do not stand on formality out here, and if we are going to be working together, you might as well call me by my given name. I will call you Miss Delilah, if that is all right, unless you prefer just Delilah." "Miss Delilah is fine," she said, though the familiarity made her nervous in a way she could not quite explain. It had been so long since anyone had treated her like a person rather than a nuisance or an opportunity that she hardly knew how to respond to simple kindness. "Good." Jackson moved to the door, then paused. "Supper will be in about an hour. Nothing fancy, just stew and biscuits, but it is hot and filling. Come down whenever you are ready. In the meantime, make yourself at home. The washroom is just across the hall if you want to freshen up." After he left, Delilah stood in the center of her new room, slowly turning to take it all in. The evening light streamed through the window, gilding everything in warm gold. She walked over and looked out at the view he had mentioned, watching the sun sink lower over the hills. In the distance, she could see cattle moving slowly toward the barn for evening feeding, and closer in, Walter was leading Rosie and the bay into the stable. It struck her then how drastically her life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday she had been on her knees in the dirt, scrubbing leather for pennies with no real hope of anything better. Today, she stood in her own room in a solid house, employed by a man who seemed genuinely decent, with the promise of fair wages and the possibility of eventually bringing Deanna west. The shift was so dramatic, it felt almost dreamlike, as if she might wake up and find herself back in that dusty stable yard. But the solid floor beneath her feet and the weight of honest exhaustion in her muscles told her this was real. She had been given a chance, perhaps the only real chance she had received since her parents died. She would not waste it. Supper that night was indeed simple but delicious, and Delilah found herself eating slowly, savoring each bite in a way she had not been able to when food was scarce and uncertain. Jackson and Walter kept up an easy conversation about ranch business, occasionally pulling her in with questions about her experience with horses or her thoughts on various equipment. "We have got about 15 saddles that need proper care," Jackson explained. "Some are mine, some belong to Walter, and a few are extras we keep for hired hands during roundup. I have been doing my best to maintain them, but I am afraid they have suffered from neglect. That will be your primary responsibility, keeping all our tack in good condition. But I also hope you will work with the horses themselves. We have got a few young ones that need gentling, and I could use a hand exercising the stock we are training for sale." "I can do all of that," Delilah assured him. "What about the house? You mentioned help there as well." "Nothing too demanding," Jackson said. "Mostly just keeping things tidy, maybe helping with meals if you are inclined. Walter and I have been batching it for months now, and I will admit the place could use a woman's touch. But that is secondary to the work with the horses and tack. I hired you for your skills with leather. Everything else is just bonus." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Delilah rose with the sun each morning, dressed in the practical work clothes Jackson had bought for her in town, split skirts and sturdy blouses that allowed for movement without sacrificing modesty. She would start in the tack room, a small building near the barn where all the saddles and bridles were stored, carefully assessing each piece and beginning the slow process of restoration. The work was meditative in its way, her hands moving with practiced skill as she cleaned and oiled and repaired. Some of the saddles were in terrible shape, the leather dried and cracked from neglect, but Delilah approached each one with patience and determination. She mixed her own leather treatments from recipes her father had taught her, combining neat's foot oil with beeswax and other ingredients to create a conditioning compound that brought tired leather back to life. Jackson would stop by several times a day to check on her progress, always with a word of encouragement or appreciation for her work. Sometimes he would linger, leaning against the doorframe and talking about the ranch, his plans for expansion, the challenges of managing cattle in the California heat. Delilah found herself looking forward to these visits, to the sound of his voice, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. In the afternoons, she would work with the horses, following Jackson's direction as they gentled the young stock. He was a patient teacher, showing her his methods for gaining a horse's trust without breaking its spirit. They would stand together in the round pen, speaking in low voices while a young colt or filly learned to accept their presence, their touch, eventually the weight of a saddle and rider. "You have got good instincts," Jackson told her one afternoon after she had successfully saddled a particularly skittish 2-year-old filly. "Most people want to force the horse to submit, but you understand that real training is about building partnership. That is a rare gift." Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks at the praise. My father always said that fear might make a horse obey, but trust makes it want to please. I suppose that lesson stuck with me. Your father sounds like he was a wise man, Jackson said, reaching out to stroke the filly's neck. His hand was close enough to Delilah's that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, and she was suddenly intensely aware of his proximity, the way he smelled of leather and hay, and something indefinably masculine. She stepped back quickly, unsettled by the direction of her thoughts. Jackson was her employer, nothing more, and she could not afford to complicate their arrangement with inappropriate feelings. Besides, a man like him, with property and prospects, would have no interest in a woman who had been polishing saddles for Pennies just a few weeks ago. But as the days stretched into weeks, Delilah found it increasingly difficult to maintain professional distance. Jackson was unlike any man she had known, treating her not as a servant or a potential conquest, but as a valued partner in the ranch's operations. He sought her opinion on everything from which horses were ready for sale to how to reorganize the tack room for better efficiency. He listened when she spoke, really listened, his full attention focused on her words as if what she had to say actually mattered. More than that, he was unfailingly kind without being condescending, finding small ways to make her life easier without making her feel like a charity case. He had Walter build a proper workbench in the tack room so she would not have to kneel on the ground. He noticed when she favored her right hand after a long day of stitching repairs and brought her a tin of salve his mother had made for just that purpose. He remembered she had mentioned missing fresh vegetables and made sure the kitchen was always stocked with produce from the ranch's garden. It was these small considerations that slowly chipped away at the walls Delilah had built around her heart. She had been alone and unprotected for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care about her comfort, her happiness, her well-being. With Jackson, she began to remember, and the remembering was both wonderful and terrifying. 2 months into her employment, Jackson came to find her in the tack room just as the sun was setting. She was putting the finishing touches on a saddle that had required extensive repair, replacing several broken stitches in the seat and re-dyeing the leather to cover water stains. "That is remarkable," Jackson said, examining her work with genuine admiration. "I thought that saddle was beyond saving, but you have made it look almost new." "It is good leather underneath," Delilah said, setting aside her tools. "Just needed some attention and care. Amazing what a difference that can make." "In leather and in people," Jackson said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Delilah, I need to talk to you about something. Can we sit?" Her heart began to hammer in her chest, 100 terrible possibilities racing through her mind. He was going to let her go. He had found someone better. He was getting married, and his new wife would not want another woman on the ranch. "Of course," she managed, settling onto the bench while he took the chair across from her. Jackson leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his expression serious. "These past 2 months have been the best the ranch has run since my mother died," he began. "The tack is in better shape than it has been in years. The horses are training beautifully, and even the house feels like a home again instead of just a place where Walter and I sleep between work shifts. You have exceeded every expectation I had, and I am grateful beyond words that you took a chance on my offer." "I am the one who should be grateful," Delilah protested. "You gave me opportunity when I had none. You have treated me with respect and fairness. The gratitude is all mine." "Then we are mutually grateful," Jackson said with a slight smile. "But that is not what I wanted to talk to you about. Delilah, when I saw you polishing those saddles in Stockton, when I watched you work with such focus and skill for wages that were barely enough to survive on, I knew you were someone special. someone strong and determined and capable. What I did not know, what I could not have anticipated, was how much your presence would change everything for me. Delilah's mouth went dry. She could not speak, could barely breathe as Jackson continued. I know it has only been 2 months, and I know the circumstances of our arrangement are unusual. You work for me, you live under my roof, and by all rights I should maintain proper professional distance. But Delilah, I cannot keep pretending that what I feel is purely professional. You have become essential to me, and not just because you polish my saddles or train my horses. You have become essential to me because when you smile, it lights up the whole ranch. Because your laugh is the best sound I have heard in years. Because every day I find myself looking for excuses to be near you, to talk to you, to hear your thoughts on everything and nothing. He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. I am not saying this well. What I am trying to tell you is that somewhere in these past 2 months, I have fallen in love with you. Completely, irrevocably in love with you. And if there is any chance, any possibility at all that you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I need you to know that I want more than a working relationship. I want everything, Delilah. I want to court you properly, to show you that I can be the kind of man you deserve. And if you will let me, if you will give me that chance, I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you agreed to come to this ranch. Delilah stared at him, her mind reeling. Of all the things she had imagined he might say, a declaration of love had not even crossed her mind. She had been so careful to guard her own growing feelings, so certain that anything she felt was one-sided and foolish. The idea that Jackson Montgomery, rancher and horseman and the kindest man she had ever met, could love her seemed impossible. "You love me," she whispered, needing to hear him say it again to believe it was real. "I do," Jackson said firmly. "I love your strength and your skill and your determination. I love the way you talk to the horses like they are old friends. I love how you have brought life back into this house, how you have made Walter smile more in 2 months than he has in 2 years. I love everything about you, Delilah Preston, and I am asking you to give me a chance to prove it." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, emotions she had kept tightly controlled for so long suddenly overwhelming her. "I thought I was alone in feeling this way," she admitted. "I've been trying so hard not to care too much, not to hope for more than what we have. But Jackson, I do care. I care so much it terrifies me. You have given me everything, a home and work I love and the first real happiness I have known in years. And somehow in the middle of all that, I fell in love with you too. With your kindness and your patience and the way you see the best in everyone. With the way you treat your animals and your land and the people who work for you. I love you, and I want everything you are offering as much as it scares me to admit it." Jackson's face transformed with joy, his smile so bright and genuine that it made him look years younger. He reached across the space between them, taking her hands in his. "It scares me too," he admitted. "After losing my brother and my parents, after watching people I loved disappear from my life, I was afraid to let anyone get that close again. But you, Delilah, you make me want to be brave. You make me believe in the future again." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other with wonder and hope and love. Then Jackson raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Delilah whispered. And then his lips were on hers, soft and sweet and full of promise. The kiss was everything Delilah had dreamed of and more, tender but passionate, respectful but unmistakably full of desire. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I know we need to do this properly," he said. "Courting and time for you to be certain. But Delilah, I want you to know that my intentions are completely serious. I want to marry you when you are ready. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch. I want to help you bring your sister west and give you the family and home you deserve. I want everything with you." "I want that too," Delilah said, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "All of it, with you." The news of their courtship spread quickly through the small community surrounding the ranch. Walter was delighted, claiming he had seen it coming from the first day, and the neighboring ranchers and their families welcomed Delilah warmly. When Jackson brought her to church on Sunday and introduced her as his intended, there were a few raised eyebrows about the speed of their relationship, but most people seemed genuinely happy for Jackson, who had been alone too long. Jackson courted her with old-fashioned romance, bringing her wildflowers from the hills and carving her a beautiful wooden box to hold her leather-working tools. They would sit on the porch in the evenings after the work was done, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future, slowly learning all the details that made each other who they were. Delilah wrote to Deanna, telling her everything, the job and the ranch and Jackson and the love that had bloomed so unexpectedly. She included money, $20 carefully saved from her wages, and a promise that soon they would be able to afford Diana's passage west. Jackson read the letter before she sealed it, then added his own postscript, inviting Diana to their wedding and promising that she would always have a home at the Montgomery ranch. 3 months after that first kiss in the tack room, on a crisp September morning with the hills turning gold around them, Delilah Preston became Delilah Montgomery. They were married at the small church in town, with Walter standing up as best man and the minister's wife as matron of honor. Delilah wore a simple but beautiful dress of cream-colored silk that Jackson had ordered specially from San Francisco, and Jackson wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut, and his eyes shining with love. "I, Jackson, take you, Delilah, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. This is my solemn vow." When it was Delilah's turn, her voice trembled with emotion but never wavered. "I, Delilah, take you, Jackson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. This is my solemn vow." The kiss they shared as husband and wife was witnessed by the assembled community, and the celebration that followed at the ranch was full of joy and laughter and hope. Walter had arranged for a feast, with neighboring ranchers contributing food and drink, and there was music and dancing as the sun set over the California hills. That night, as they lay together in the big bedroom that had been Jackson's alone but was now theirs, Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that dusty stable yard where she had polished saddles for Pennies, through desperation and hope and unexpected love, to this moment of perfect contentment in the arms of a man who had promised her everything and delivered on that promise in ways both large and small. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I am thinking about how you told me to polish your life and you would give me everything," Delilah said. "Although you did not say it quite that way." Jackson chuckled. "No, I suppose I was more subtle. But the sentiment was the same. I saw what you could do with neglected leather, how you could take something worn and overlooked and restore it to beauty. And I thought, maybe she could do that for my life too. Maybe she could take this lonely rancher and this fading dream and help me make it shine again. We made it shine together, Delilah corrected. That is the thing about restoration, Jackson. It takes both parties working in partnership. You gave me the opportunity and the tools, but I brought the skill and the dedication. Together we created something neither of us could have managed alone. Together, Jackson agreed, pulling her closer. Always together from now on. Deanna arrived the following spring, stepping off the stage in Stockton with wide eyes and a travel-worn carpetbag. Delilah was waiting for her, along with Jackson, and the reunion between the sisters was tearful and joyous. Deanna was 19 now, taller than Delilah remembered, and with a mature grace that suggested the past few years had changed her just as profoundly as they had changed Delilah. "You look happy," Deanna said when they finally pulled apart, studying her sister's face carefully. "Really, truly happy. I was so worried when your letters were sparse, but now I understand. You were building a whole new life." "We were," Delilah confirmed, taking Jackson's hand. "And now you are part of it too. Deanna, this is my husband, Jackson Montgomery." "Jackson, this is my sister Deanna, the person I love most in the world besides you." "Second most is still a pretty high honor," Jackson said warmly, taking Deanna's hand in a respectful shake. "Welcome to California, Deanna. Your sister has told me so much about you that I feel like I already know you. I hope you will consider the ranch your home for as long as you like." Deanna settled into life at the Montgomery ranch with surprising ease. She took over most of the cooking and household management, revealing a talent for organization and hospitality that made the ranch house feel even more like a true home. She also proved to have a way with the garden, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the California soil with patient dedication. The first summer Deanna was with them, the ranch prospered beyond Jackson's best projections. The horses they had trained sold for excellent prices, the cattle brought premium rates at market, and Jackson was able to purchase additional grazing land to expand their operation. More importantly, the ranch felt complete in a way it never had before, filled with laughter and conversation and the comfortable rhythms of family life. It was during this golden time that Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Jackson one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same place where they had spent so many hours courting. "Are you happy?" she asked after delivering the news, suddenly nervous about his reaction. Jackson turned to her with an expression of such pure joy that it answered the question before he spoke. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, taking both her hands in his. "Delilah, you have given me so much already. You have brought light and love back into my life, helped me build this ranch into something I am proud of, brought your sister here to become part of our family. And now a baby, our baby. How could I be anything but thrilled?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Delilah continuing to work with the horses and leather well into her 7th month, only stopping when Jackson and Deanna ganged up on her and insisted she needed to rest more. Those final months of waiting were filled with preparation, with Deanna sewing baby clothes and Jackson building a beautiful cradle from oak, what he had been saving for something special. Their son was born on a snowy January night in 1880, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the entire household. Jackson was there for the birth, holding Delilah's hand through the long hours of labor and weeping openly when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in his arms. "He is perfect," Jackson whispered, studying the baby's tiny face with wonder. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names extensively during the pregnancy, but standing there with their son in Jackson's arms, Delilah knew exactly what felt right. "James," she said. James Walter Montgomery, after the brother Jackson lost and the man who has been like family to us both. Jackson's eyes glistened with fresh tears. James Walter, he repeated. That is perfect. He would have loved that, my brother, and Walter will be impossible to live with once he hears the news. Walter was indeed overwhelmed when they told him. This gruff old cowboy reduced to stammering emotion at the honor. He became James's devoted shadow, teaching the boy to ride almost as soon as he could walk and filling his head with stories of the old days and the wild country that was slowly being tamed. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by both challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to grow, with Jackson and Delilah working as true partners in every decision. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated successful sales and new foals, built their reputation as breeders of the finest horses in the San Joaquin Valley. Diana married in the summer of 1882. A solid young farmer named Peter Daniels, who had been courting her with patient determination for over a year. The wedding was held at the ranch, and as Delilah watched her sister dance with her new husband, she felt the last piece of her old grief finally settle into peace. Both Preston sisters had found their way to happiness, had built lives and loves from the ashes of loss and hardship. 2 more children followed James, a daughter named Elizabeth in 1883 and another son named Thomas in 1886. The house rang with the sounds of childhood, with laughter and occasional tears, with the pounding of small feet on wooden floors and the endless questions of curious minds. Jackson proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving and always ready to set aside work to spend time with his children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson took Delilah back to Stockton, to the stable yard where they had first met. The place looked different now, smaller somehow, and Thomas had long since retired, the stable under new management. They stood together in the dusty yard, remembering that first conversation. "You ever regret it?" Jackson asked. "Taking a chance on a stranger with a wild offer?" Delilah shook her head, leaning into his solid warmth. "Not for a single moment. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You offered me dignity when I had forgotten what that felt like. And you kept your promise, Jackson. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Jackson corrected, echoing words she had spoken on their wedding night. "That is how the best partnerships work. That is how love works. You polish my life every day just by being in it, Delilah. You make everything shine brighter." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, the golden light painting the hills in shades of amber and rose. The house was full when they arrived, with their children playing in the yard and Diana visiting with her own family and Walter sitting on the porch watching over it all with satisfaction. As Delilah stood taking it all in, Jackson came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "This is what I imagined that day in Stockton," he murmured in her ear. "When I saw you working so hard for so little, I imagined what it would be like if you brought that dedication and skill to something bigger. If you had a real reason to shine, not just survival but happiness. And look what we built, Delilah. Look at this beautiful life we created together." Delilah turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his beloved face in her hands. "You told me you would give me everything if I would help polish your life," she said softly. "But what you gave me was so much more than material things. You gave me back my dignity. You gave me purpose and partnership. You gave me love that was real and lasting and true. You gave me family and home and a future I could believe in. That, Jackson Montgomery, is everything that matters." The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and moments, each one adding to the tapestry of their shared life. James grew tall and strong, taking to ranch work with natural aptitude, and his father's patient way with horses. Elizabeth proved to have her mother's skill with leather and her aunt's gift for healing, studying herbs and remedies with Diana, and becoming the person everyone turned to when they needed medical care. Thomas was the dreamer of the family, filling notebooks with sketches and stories, talking about seeing the wider world beyond the California hills. Jackson and Delilah encouraged all of them, understanding that the greatest gift parents could give their children was the freedom to become themselves. They had both known what it was to have dreams deferred by circumstance, and they were determined that their children would have every opportunity to pursue their passions. In 1890, on a warm June evening very similar to the one when Jackson had first proposed, they sat on their porch watching their children play. James was teaching Thomas to rope fence posts with varying degrees of success, while Elizabeth sat nearby working on a saddle repair under her mother's guidance. Diana and Peter's children were there too, running wild through the yard in the careless way of youth. "Do you remember what you told me that first night?" Delilah asked, her hand finding Jackson's automatically. "When you came to find me in the tack room." "I told you a lot of things that night," Jackson replied with a smile. "You will have to be more specific." "You said you saw me polishing those saddles and you knew I was someone special, someone strong and determined and capable. And then you said you wanted me to polish your life, that if I did, you would give me everything." "I did say that," Jackson confirmed, "and I meant every word." "Did I deliver on that promise, Delilah? Did I give you everything?" Delilah looked out at the scene before her, at the children and the land and the life they had built. She thought about the woman she had been 12 years ago, desperate and alone, polishing saddles for pennies in a dusty stable yard. And she thought about the woman she was now, loved and secure, with a family and a home and a partnership that had only grown stronger with time. "You gave me more than everything," she said finally. "You gave me a reason to believe in miracles again, because that is what this is, Jackson. What we have built together, what we share, what we have created. It is a miracle born from a chance meeting and a leap of faith and two people who were brave enough to reach for happiness even when it seemed impossible." Jackson pulled her close, kissing her temple with the easy affection of long familiarity. "The miracle was you, Delilah. You were the one who took a stranger's offer despite every reason to be suspicious. You were the one who worked hard and loved harder and made this place into a real home. I just gave you the opportunity. You did the rest." "We did the rest," Delilah corrected firmly. "Together, always together." As the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Delilah reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. She had started as a farm girl in Missouri, lost everything to disease and debt, struggled across half the country chasing hope and survival. She had been reduced to the lowest work for the smallest wages, had known hunger and fear and desperation. And then a cowboy had found her polishing saddles for pennies and had seen not just her skill but her worth. He had offered her not just a job but a chance at something more, something better. He had offered her everything, and in return she had given him everything she had, her skill and her dedication and eventually her heart. Together they had built something beautiful and lasting. A ranch that prospered, a family that thrived, a love that deepened with every passing year. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, had faced challenges and celebrated victories, had grown and changed and become better versions of themselves through their partnership. The children eventually tired of their games and came tumbling onto the porch, full of demands for dinner and stories and attention. Jackson and Delilah rose to meet these demands with practiced ease, moving through the evening rituals of family life with comfortable synchronicity. But throughout it all, their hands would find each other. Their eyes would meet across the room, small touches and glances that spoke of love too deep for words. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, they lay together in their bed and talked about the future. Jackson wanted to expand the horse breeding program, focusing on a new line he thought would be particularly suited to the changing needs of ranchers. Delilah wanted to train James to take over more of the tack maintenance, preparing him to eventually run that side of the business himself. "Do you ever miss it?" Jackson asked suddenly. "The adventure of not knowing what comes next. We have built something so stable and secure. Does it ever feel too predictable?" Delilah considered the question seriously before answering. "I had enough adventure in my youth to last a lifetime," she said finally. "Losing my parents, struggling to survive, coming west with nothing but hope. That was adventure, and it was terrifying. What we have now, this life we have built, this is not predictable in a boring way. It is reliable in a beautiful way. I know when I wake up tomorrow you will be beside me. I know our children are safe and loved. I know the work I do matters and is valued. That is not limitation, Jackson. That is freedom. The freedom to live without constant fear, to plan for a future I can count on, to love without wondering if it will be torn away. I spent too many years without that freedom to ever take it for granted." Jackson gathered her close, his heart full. "You always know exactly what to say to put things in perspective. I love you, Delilah Montgomery. I loved you when you were polishing saddles for Pennies, and I love you now when you are polishing our life together into something that shines. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Delilah replied, "for seeing something in me worth investing in, for taking a chance on a desperate woman in a stable yard, for keeping every promise you ever made, for being the partner I needed even before I knew I needed one. I will love you forever, Jackson. That is my promise, and I have never broken a promise in my life." They drifted to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. The woman who had once polished saddles for Pennies had indeed polished a life, but not through servitude or desperation. She had polished it through partnership and love, through dedication and skill, through the simple but profound act of showing up every day and choosing to build something beautiful with the man who had seen her worth when she could barely see it herself. The years continued their steady march, bringing both expected and unexpected changes. Walter passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1892, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had helped build. James took over more and more of the daily operations, showing the same patient skill with horses and land that his father possessed. Elizabeth married a young doctor and moved to Sacramento, though she visited often and maintained her interest in both medicine and leatherwork. Thomas eventually went east to study art, sending letters full of excitement about the world beyond California while always promising to return. Jackson and Delilah aged together gracefully, their hair going silver but their love remaining as strong as ever. They became the foundation of their community, the couple that others looked to as an example of what marriage could be when built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Young people would come to them for advice, and Jackson and Delilah would share their story, the unlikely beginning and the beautiful life that had grown from it. "The secret," Delilah would say, "is recognizing that love is both a feeling and a choice. The feeling brought us together, but the choice kept us together. Every day we chose each other, chose to work as partners, chose to see the best in each other even when times were hard. That is what built this life, not luck or fate, but daily choice and dedication." In the summer of 1898, they celebrated their 20th anniversary with a gathering that brought together family and friends from across the valley. Deanna and Peter were there with their grown children, Elizabeth and her doctor husband, even Thomas, who had traveled from New York for the occasion. James stood tall and proud with his wife and their infant son, the next generation of Montgomerys to work the land. As the celebration wound down and the last guests departed, Jackson took Delilah's hand and led her out to the tack room, the place where so much of their story had unfolded. It looked different now, expanded and reorganized over the years, but the essence remained the same. The smell of leather and oil, the tools hung in precise order, the saddles waiting in various states of repair and maintenance. "You remember what I told you that day in Stockton?" Jackson asked, echoing their conversation from years earlier. "When I offered you this job, you told me you recognized quality work when you saw it," Delilah replied, "and that you recognized desperation too. I told you that if you would polish my life, I would give you everything," Jackson said. "And I meant it, Delilah. But what I did not understand then was that you would not just polish my life. You would transform it completely. You took a lonely man with a fading dream and helped him build something extraordinary. You gave me children and partnership and love beyond measure. You did not just polish my life, my darling. You made it shine in ways I never imagined possible." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the depth of emotion in his voice even after 20 years together. "And you took a woman who had been reduced to polishing saddles for pennies and gave her dignity and purpose and love. You saw past my circumstances to my potential. You offered me not just a job but a life, and then you worked beside me every day to make that life more than either of us could have achieved alone. We polished each other's lives, Jackson. That is the truth of what we built here." They stood together in the tack room, surrounded by the evidence of years of skilled work and dedicated care, and they kissed with the same passion and tenderness that had marked their first kiss 20 years earlier. Outside, the California sun was setting over the hills, painting the world in shades of gold, and somewhere in the distance they could hear their grandchildren laughing as they played. The years that followed brought the changes that come with age and time. Jackson's joints grew stiff from a lifetime of ranch work, and Delilah's eyes were not as sharp as they once had been. But they adapted and adjusted, finding new ways to contribute and stay active. They taught their grandchildren the skills they had honed over decades, passing down knowledge of horses and leather and land management. In the spring of 1905, Jackson fell ill with pneumonia. For 2 weeks, he fought the fever while Delilah sat beside his bed, holding his hand and talking to him about their life together, reminding him of everything they had built and everyone who needed him to get better. Elizabeth came with her medical training and her medicines. Diana came with her healing herbs and her prayers, and their children gathered to support their parents through the crisis. Jackson survived, but the illness left him weakened, less able to handle the physical demands of ranch work. James took over full management of the operation with his father's guidance and approval, and Jackson and Delilah settled into a new phase of life, one focused more on grandchildren and quiet moments than daily labor. "I always knew this day would come," Jackson said one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching James work with a young horse in the corral. "The day when I would have to hand the reins to the next generation. I thought it would be harder, but knowing that James learned everything from us, that he will maintain what we built, it makes it easier." "We built something that will last beyond us," Delilah agreed. "That is the greatest achievement of all, I think. Not just surviving or even thriving, but creating something that continues after we are gone." Our children and grandchildren will carry forward the lessons we taught them, the values we lived by. That is a kind of immortality. On their 30th anniversary in 1908, the family gathered once again, this time for a quieter celebration. Jackson's health had continued to decline slowly, though his mind remained sharp and his spirit undimmed. They sat together on the porch as the family toasted them and shared memories and expressed gratitude for the example they had set. When everyone had gone and they were alone again, Jackson turned to Delilah with tears in his eyes. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If I had my life to live over again, if I could go back to that day in Stockton and make a different choice, I would not change a single thing. Every moment with you has been a gift. Every day of our life together has been exactly what I needed and more than I deserved. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah Montgomery, and I will love you beyond death and into whatever comes after." Delilah cried then, knowing what he was really saying, understanding that he felt time running short. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me too," she said through her tears. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me life and love and purpose. You made me believe in goodness again when I had forgotten it existed. And I will love you forever, Jackson. In this life and whatever comes next, I will love you forever." Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, on a crisp December morning with Delilah beside him. His last words were of love for her and pride in what they had built together. The entire community mourned his loss, remembering him as a fair man and a good neighbor, a skilled rancher and a devoted husband and father. Delilah grieved deeply but not despairingly. She had lost the love of her life, but she had also had 30 glorious years with him, years full of love and partnership and joy. She had their children and grandchildren, the ranch that was their shared legacy, and memories enough to fill a lifetime. She continued to live at the ranch house, welcomed and cherished by James and his family, spending her days teaching her grandchildren about leather work and horses, and telling them stories about the grandfather they would always remember with love. She lived for another 12 years after Jackson's death, watching her grandchildren grow and begin having children of their own. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under James's capable management, saw Elizabeth become one of Sacramento's most respected healers, saw Thomas gain fame as an artist whose paintings of the American West were celebrated across the country. On a warm June evening in 1920, 60 years, almost to the day since she had first arrived at the Montgomery ranch, Delilah sat on the porch with her great-grandchildren playing at her feet. The sun was setting over the hills, painting them in shades of gold and amber, and she felt a deep sense of peace and completion. "Tell us the story again," one of her great-granddaughters asked, settling at her feet. "About how you met great-grandfather." Delilah smiled, always willing to tell the story that had become family legend. "I was polishing saddles for Pennies in Stockton," she began, her voice still strong despite her 82 years. "Working in a dusty stable yard with no real hope for anything better. And then a cowboy came along, a good man with kind eyes and a generous heart. He looked at me and saw not just a desperate woman but someone with skill and potential. He said he had a ranch where I could put my talents to use, and if I would help him build something good, he would give me everything in return." "And did he?" the child asked, even though she knew the answer. "He gave me more than everything," Delilah said softly. "He gave me a home and a purpose and a family. He gave me love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. He gave me exactly what he promised and more than I ever dared to dream. And together, we built this beautiful life, this ranch and this family and this legacy." That is the power of keeping your promises and working as true partners. That is the magic of love that is built on respect and dedication and choice. Delilah passed away peacefully in her sleep that very night, slipping away as gently as falling asleep. Her family mourned but also celebrated, knowing that she had lived a full and remarkable life, that she had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return, that she had built something lasting and beautiful that would continue long after she was gone. They buried her next to Jackson on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the oak trees they had planted together in the early years of their marriage. The stone marking their graves was simple but eloquent, bearing both their names and dates in a single line that captured the essence of their story. She polished saddles for Pennies. He gave her everything. Together they built a life that shines forever. The Montgomery ranch continued to thrive through the generations that followed, each new steward adding their own touches while maintaining the core values that Jackson and Delilah had established. The story of how it all began, of a desperate woman and a generous cowboy and an offer that changed everything, was passed down through the years, becoming the foundation legend of the family. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings when the sun sets over the California hills in shades of gold and amber, people say you can still feel their presence on that porch. Two souls who loved each other so well that even death could not fully separate them. They built something that lasted, something that shone, something that proved the power of seeing potential in people and offering them the chance to become everything they could be. From pennies in a dusty stable yard to everything that mattered. That was the journey of Delilah Preston Montgomery. And it all started because one cowboy had the wisdom to recognize quality work when he saw it, the generosity to offer opportunity where others saw only desperation, and the courage to fall in love with a woman who polished his life and made it shine.